Welcome, everyone, to the Family Capacity Building Workshop, Supporting Your Child with FASD. My name is Dawn Miller, and I am the FASD Coordinator for Hastings, Prince Edward and Northumberland at the Queenie Children's Treatment Centre here in Belleville. I'm going to be your host for today. We appreciate you being here, and we hope that you're all staying safe and healthy at home. We have over 50 attendees from across Eastern Ontario joining us today, and we're very excited to have you with us. One of the places that we are presenting from today is the county of Renfrew, and I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the lands of that county. We wish to express our ongoing commitment to formally recognize and acknowledge the traditional lands on which we live and work. We find it essential to honor that for time immemorial and long before our arrival, led fruitful and full lives on these lands. We acknowledge that the land we are standing upon is the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. The citizens of the Algonquin Nation did not relinquish title to their land to the government by treaty or otherwise. The Algonquin way of living has resulted in a great stewardship of this land and preservation of the beautiful landscape and bounty provided by Mother Earth. As we journey along the path of reconciliation, we commit to educating ourselves as individuals, as professionals, and as a community. We look forward to a new, reconciled, respectful relationship with all Indigenous people. This event today is hosted by the Coordinated Service Planning Provincial Network. The network comprises a consortium of 28 service planning lead agencies from across 34 regions in Ontario. As sponsors for the workshop, with funding from the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, the network comes with extensive knowledge of FASD in terms of research, the provision of clinical and family support services, and the delivery of the FASD worker program. Some general housekeeping for today. This presentation is approximately 2.5 hours long, and we'll have a brief intermission about halfway through. At 2 different points in the workshop today, you will be asked to join a virtual breakout session to participate in an activity and discussion. You'll be given instructions on how to do this during those times. Throughout the workshop, the presenters will provide opportunity to ask questions. If you have questions, we ask that you type it into the chat box, which you'll see at the top of your screen. We may not have time to get to all of the questions. If that's the case, you can send it to an email address that we will also put in the chat box for you. This event is being recorded, so if you wish to not be on camera, please turn your camera off. And we would ask that while the presentation is ongoing, that you have yourself muted. And please use the chat for any questions or comments or any technical difficulties. We are here to help, so please reach out if you have any questions during the event. Eric Merrier, who is a service coordinator at Surrey Place in Toronto, will be our presenter today. And helping during the breakout sessions will be myself and Victoria Gillan, who is a FASD worker at Family and Children's Services of Renfrew County. I thank you for your time for this introduction, and I'm now going to turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Donna, for that introduction. I hope everyone can see our slide. I'm sharing my screen right now. Welcome to Supporting Your Child with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, a workshop for families. My name is Eric Merrier, and I will be your presenter today for this workshop. So there's a lot of information in this presentation, and some of the language can be clinical. When we started working on this in November, we tried to make the language as relevant as possible for families, so as meaningful as possible for you folks. But sometimes some of the clinical language that we tend to use in our offices do end up on the slide. So please ask if you have any questions around the terminology that we'll be going through today. The things that we're hoping that you'll be able to walk away with today from our presentation is learning how to best identify how your child's strengths can accommodate them during challenges. The second is learning to assess when advocacy is required for your child. And the third and last one is learning how best to detect when to involve your child in solving challenges. Throughout the presentation, you'll see these three objectives referred to maybe in some of our strategies and some of our accommodations that we're recommending. And beside those accommodations or strategies, you'll see those letters pop up so that they look like M&Ms. So you'll see the green S appear if a strategy we're talking about is sort of refers back to learning how to best identify your child's strengths and how they can best accommodate them during challenges. And it's the same for advocacy and for participation. So those letters will keep appearing during our presentation today. So one thing that, when we designed this workshop, the overarching, I think, theme that kept popping up was, and it's the one thing that we want to say from the top, and it's probably the most important idea that we want to communicate with you today, and that is to always stay connected with your child. We've gone through a pretty tough year with COVID. Some of us have had to work from home while our kids were in the next room online learning. So we've got to spend a lot of time with our kids these past 12 months. And, it's important sometimes to remember when times are good, right? And to also to remember to enjoy those moments and to remark them, to label those moments as good times, right? When you're with your child or your teen. A lot of the times we are going through a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles, but there are those moments that are actually very good, that that are actually very peaceful, or that are actually very quite meaningful between you and your child. So remember to remark on those times. Your child, your teenager needs to know that those moments are moments that were very successful, right? We need to label those moments for what they really are. And during those times, during those moments, that's when we're building the foundation of trust and support between ourselves and with our child or with our teenager. So as much as possible, take short breaks with your child throughout the day, with your teenager, just to talk, maybe a few minutes, maybe engage in some enjoyable activities. It doesn't have to be a whole hour. It could just be little moments throughout the day where we're checking in with our child and we're making that connection with them. And if we can, we're engaging them in some kind of activity or conversation. Your relationship with your child is way more important than getting the math homework done. It's way more important than meeting all those expectations that people have of us as parents, or as the expectations that they have on your child in the outside world, right? Within our home, it's much more important to just keep that connection strong between our family members. Really, it's a foundation on which we're going to build problem solving. And we need that foundation in order to work together, right? As sort of as partners. So as much as possible with your child, with your teenager, problem solve together. Become detectives, to look for some of the causes or for some of the challenges or behaviors. We're going to use that idea a lot today, this idea of being detectives, to sort of figure out where some of these issues, some of these challenges are really coming from, what is really causing these challenges, and how can we best support our child or our teen with some of these. Ask your child if they have any ideas that might help. They might, your younger child might give you some ideas at the beginning that seem quite silly, but if we keep this consistent, this mode of problem solving where we're always checking in with our child to see if they have any ideas around some of the challenges that they're facing. If we keep that consistent within their lives, after a while, some of their answers that they give you might be quite meaningful, might be quite relevant. So it's good to get that process started with your child. So again, become detectives together to solve problems. There we see that blue P pop up, and that's because we're referring back to that learning objective that we had today, and that's learning how best to detect when to involve our child in accommodations, in strategies. Dr. Ross Green, whom I think a lot of you already know, he's the author of The Explosive Child. And he says that challenging behavior occurs when the expectations being placed on your youth or your child exceed that child or youth's capacity to respond adaptively. So what he's saying here is a lot of the times when we see behaviors, when our kids fight with us or when there's tantrums, those are situations that the child or teen is finding themselves in where they can't cope, where they don't have the skills to meet the expectation that that situation calls for. Either maybe because of dysmaturity, they're not able to cope the way other kids their own age will be able to cope in that situation, or they don't have a particular skill that's being called upon in that situation. They don't have the particular skill to meet that expectation that everyone has on them in that situation. So Dr. Ross Green says that some children, some youth are lacking the skills to handle certain demands and certain expectations. And he feels the goal should be to help kids and their parents solve those problems, what he calls lagging skills, rather than trying to modify our kids' behavior through the application of rewards or punishments, right? That's how we were raised, right? That's sort of the traditional form of parenting. We're praised when we do something well, or we're given a reward sometimes, and sometimes there's a punishment when we don't do what we're supposed to do, right? So maybe something's being taken away if we break a rule. Trying to control a kid's behavior, trying to make them do something that they're not able to do is impossible, even if you give a reward or you threaten a punishment. That's what Dr. Green is saying. And we know with our kids with FASD, a lot of consequence-based strategies don't work. Some kids with FASD don't make that connection between cause and effect as intuitively as we do, those of us who don't have the diagnosis of FASD. We know that if something happens or if we do something, that may have a consequence in the future. So we might do something great and then we're rewarded. We might break a rule and then we're punished, right? We make that connection quite intuitively. Some with FASD may not be able to make that connection as naturally as we do, and so those consequences aren't very effective. Those strategies where we're using consequences like that, they're not effective. It's much more effective to support your child through those situations that keep coming up where they're not meeting the expectation, where they're getting frustrated, where they're tantruming, or where they don't have the skill to meet that expectation in that situation. We speak up often when our kids are doing something wrong to correct them, and our heart's in the right place. We're trying to help them when we tell them that they're doing something wrong to correct them. But there are many things during the day that our kids do amazing, that they do quite well, and no one tells them. No one focuses on those little things, and sometimes they're big things. So another idea that we want to bring across to you today, it's the second biggest idea that we want to bring to you, is to start putting more of your energy and focus on your child's strengths. Placing all our attention all the time on what our child or what our teen does wrong limits their potential and it negates their strengths. It's an attempt to correct, so our heart is in the right place, but it doesn't tell our child or our teen what to do. It builds on nothing. There's really no teaching in those moments. So what we suggest is to be strengths focused. Celebrate your child's successes. It'll make it easier for them to recognize something as a success as well. They may not know that some of the great stuff that they're doing is great stuff. They may not know that they might be the only person in the family who knows how to work the computer, who knows how to, to turn the TV on without maybe a weird light flashing on the side of the screen. They might know all these great things, and no one tells them that these are strengths, that these are skills. So they won't see those as skills. They won't see those as strengths. So we're asking parents to focus on your child's strengths when talking to them. You may already be doing this, and you may already have success doing this. And knowing your strengths, knowing your own strengths, and knowing when to label something as a strength helps you when you're talking to teachers. It helps you when you're talking to employers so that they can play to your strengths. We had a young lady at Surrey Place where I work in Toronto, and she worked in a costume shop for big Hollywood studios that were coming in and out of Toronto. And they called her into the office one day because she was having difficulty where they had positioned her within that shop. And she was able to tell them what her strengths were. She knew what her strengths were. They had been labeled for her. Her and her mom had done a lot of work together. And she was able to tell them what she was really good at and what really interested her in that shop. Because she was very interested in what was going on there. It was very exciting to work there. And so what the managers there, is they started playing to her strength. They positioned her within a store that really, brought out her strengths, and then she started to contribute much more positively in that environment. And as a side effect too, as a sort of a payoff, she started to feel a lot more confident in herself, and also in herself in that environment. So when we focus on strengths, we're really building self-confidence. As our kids get older and they keep being told you can't do this, or you weren't so good at doing this, or you're causing problems over here, there's a buildup after a while of seeing yourself very negatively. And as you get older, you're less likely to want to try new things. We see those kids sometimes when they're young, they're very motivated and they're very active. They want to try new things. But as they get older, they seem a bit jaded, and maybe they just want to hang out in the basement playing video games, or just hang out by themselves. They're not putting themselves out there as much to try new things, or they're not as motivated to get out there and see if there's something that interests them. So we want to build that confidence to make them go out there, right? Also, take an interest in their interests, validate their interests. I know as a parent, I've watched a lot of bad television just so that I could bond with my kids, just so that I could have conversations with my kids, and also find out more about what interests them in the world, right? Remember, interests become strengths. We may not see an interest as a particular strength. I know probably my parents didn't see knowing how to use the internet as a strength when I was younger, but now we see that there's some folks who can really master the internet and get the information they need quite quickly, and that's a strength, especially if you're part of a team that does a lot of research and things like that. So what was my interest as a kid that my parents didn't really feel was an interest at all, or a strength, now has turned into one of my strengths, right? So it's important to look at what our kids' interests are and see if you can facilitate that. Even if you feel it doesn't contribute anything to the world, or it contribute anything to the family, if anything, it contributes a whole lot to your child's life and how they view their life. So tell their teachers, tell educational assistants, tell their coaches of their strengths, of their interests. They'll need to know that, because they need to know how best to interact with your child, how best to play to their strengths, and provide them, if possible, with an all about me sheet. Some of you may have already seen this or used it, where you sort of list a whole bunch of things about your child, about your teenager, and you can hand that in to the adults that they interact with during the day. This all about me sheet, you can Google it. You can Google all about me and then the acronym FASD, or you can look it up in our resource list, which will give you the link at the end of this workshop. And we'll tell you more about that resource list as well. Okay, so your child does great stuff, and it's important to recognize, to compliment their successes. Again, we're asking you to be a detective here with strengths. Be a strengths detective. Keep a strengths inventory, a list of the things that they do quite well, and keep it updated. Inform other people of their strengths. Change this list as they move to new stages, maybe as they move to a new school. Some parents, what they do is they keep a journal of everyone they've contacted, or all the meetings they've had around their child with the diagnosis. And in that as well, they keep that list updated of their child's strengths, of their child's interests. Maybe your child works hard, right? Or maybe you have a child or a teen that learns by doing. They're a hands-on learner. That's a strength that people would need to know about. Maybe you have a daughter who won't quit until she's finished. You send her out to go shovel the driveway. It's dinner time. You call her in, and she won't come in until she's done shoveling that driveway. That's a strength. Maybe they're often in the moment and they enjoy activities to the fullest, and that spills out to everyone around them, right? So they become someone that is really fun to be around. That's a strength. Maybe they're a captivating public speaker, or they're a funny storyteller, and we think, wow, they're just showing off. They're just a showboat. Well, talking in front of a large audience or even a small audience and keeping them captivated, that's a strength. Not a lot of us can do that. I know that was a skill that I had to learn over many, many, many years. Some kids just can do it. That's a big, big strength. Maybe they're a strong visual learner, so they learn really well by seeing someone else do it, or they follow instructions better when there's a visual that goes along with the instruction. Maybe they're really creative, right? They've got these great ideas, and on group projects, they're the creative spark that gets everybody start, right? They get the ball rolling. They may need support with other parts, other steps of that project, but just to get everybody rolling on something, they're the person, right? They're the guy, they're the girl to get that started. That's a strength. Maybe they easily make new friends. You know, we have 2-year-olds that can go into a park and within 30 seconds they're holding the hand of another 2-year-old and they're friends and they're walking together toward the monkey bars and no words were exchanged. They're just this engaging, open personality. That's a strength. And maybe, you know, they're amazing with computers, with electronics, and we think, oh, it's just their generation. They just know how to do this. Well, they had to learn how to do that, right? So it's a strength. Keep track, again, of your child's strengths. Knowing your child's strengths will help you know what to change in your environment to build on these strengths, to build on these interests. If they have an interest, as much as possible, help facilitate that interest, right? Help them engage in a more and more in a positive way with the world around them. Help them, when knowing your child's strengths also helps you become a better advocate. When you're sharing information with other adults in your child's life on how to arrange your own environments to successfully interact with your child. We had a granddad at Surrey Place, and he was taking care of his granddaughter, and the teacher allowed him, the school allowed him to come into the classroom, and he was able to set up her desk in a way that he felt she would best serve her in that group environment with lots of sensory things coming at his granddaughter. But he arranged a desk away from one area, and he put it closer to the teacher's desk, and he arranged it somewhere a certain angle, and he knew this would be that extra layer of support that the child would benefit from in that environment. Third, knowing your child's strengths helps you with strategies, with accommodations to challenges. Always ask yourself, can some of these interests, can some of these strengths be used in accommodations to certain challenges, right? You might have a kid who's really good with electronics. Well, can some of what he can do with a phone, can some of those things, like maybe using a calendar app, be used for him to be more on time during appointments, maybe setting up having him set up his own reminders, visual reminders that pop up on his device, things like that. Focusing on their strengths as well, besides these 3 points, also takes away from all that attention we place on their challenges. If we have a child that has, you know, some issues at school, maybe you've got a teen right now who's had issues with the law, that suddenly becomes a huge part of their life. It becomes a huge part of our life as well as parents, and that can take over, right? It's like this growing bubble that's taking over the child's life. When we start to focus on other areas of their lives as well, like interests, like strengths, what we want to do is we want to grow that bubble, right? So now that bubble that's all challenged, there's a real estate competition happening now, because in our child's life, these other bubbles are growing. It's not just the troubles. It's not just the issues. It doesn't mean that those issues, that those challenges, we're not addressing. No, we're still addressing those. But that's not the only thing your child views their life through, right? They've got other things in their lives, other areas that are positive, that they're very interested in, that they're not avoiding. And we want those areas to grow, right? Your child could be very multifaceted, right? We want all these other areas in your child's life to grow so that those issues, those challenges are not the only thing that is taking up your child's or yours, your day-to-day. We've got all these other areas happening. And as a result, when you start to place more attention on their strengths, more attention on their interests, they might be more interested in those, focusing as well on those positive areas, maybe developing a new skill, maybe taking an interest in a volunteer role where they would learn some on-job training, things like that, learn some responsibilities. So as much as possible, involve your child using their strengths, using their interests. You know, you might have a little girl who, when you go grocery shopping, or a little boy, and they take up, you know, they make grocery shopping last so long because they keep doing all these things. They really want to help, and, you know, we want them to just, you know, keep their hands to themselves. Well, that involving them in something like grocery shopping can be something that's quite meaningful for a kiddo, right? It could make them feel like they're contributing. So if they like to do things like that, like doing the groceries, do more of these kinds of activities with them. What it does is it builds confidence, and they start to have more and more positive experiences, not just experiences where they're getting into trouble, where someone's telling them that they shouldn't be doing this. They too are not enjoying the tantrums. They're not enjoying when they're having conflicts with you, even though we think they're just trying to see what they can get away with, right? They're not really enjoying having a blowout with you. They would rather have these kinds of positive experiences, and they would rather have them with you. So if they like to be outside or active, involve them in shoveling, involve them in raking. We may not think raking and shoveling is fun, but you'd be surprised to an 8-year-old holding, the big person shovel and contributing to the family, helping remove snow. That could be something that's quite meaningful to them. And if they like to be helpful, maybe they'd like to take the garbage out, teach them how to do that. If they like computers or phones, have them find out information for you, like the weather, like maybe store hours, or when the next, big Netflix show is being released. As well, like I said before, if they like to use tech, maybe they could use tech to help them, such as, choosing a really cool calendar app that gives you really cool visual reminders. And if they like to use phones or devices, show an interest in the apps they use. We want them to share as much of their lives with us as possible and try new activities together. Find time to try new things together. It could just be, for a few minutes at a time. Maybe you'd want to show them, your own joy of hiking or ice skating or those kinds of things. We can't really ice skate anymore right now, but something that you think they might be interested in. And it doesn't you don't have to do it for a whole hour or a half hour. It could just be a few minutes. We're just trying it, and then we can move on to something else. But we want to expose them to different kinds of things because we want to see what might turn into an interest or what might already be a strength. Does anyone have any questions? Victoria, is there any questions out there?
There's only questions, Eric, about ensuring the slides will be available to the participants after today's presentation.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, we love that kind of feedback. Yeah, so we are going to try and we will have a website in a month with these slides available.
You listen for a minute, honey. They're explaining something.
However, we will have these slides available formally on a website. I will be providing my email address later on in the presentation, in the chat as well. We will try to send them out. We don't know if we'll be able to do this, but we will try and send them back out to everyone who registered today, if that's a possibility. So those three options, but you can also ask your FASD worker about that website where the slides will be located, and they might be able to help facilitate you getting your hands on those slides. Again, I will be putting my email address in the chat at the end of the presentation, so you can email me any questions around the slides and getting a copy of the slides. But we're really happy that you guys want the slides. That's really good feedback for us. Okay, so thank you, Victoria. I heard someone talking in the background. Was that someone asking a question?
I think it was Fred. Fred, did you have a question there?
Yes, just a second. No, it was answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to our next section. And we all know everyone learns differently. No one learns the same. And we know that FASD can affect certain areas of the brain. So with FASD, your child also may learn differently. CAN FASD, which is a research body in Canada, which is quite well known around the world, they describe fetal alcohol spectrum disorder as a lifelong disability that affects the brain and body of people who are exposed to alcohol in the womb. Each person with FASD has both strengths and challenges and will need special supports to help them succeed with many different parts of their daily lives. That support over time does change. So that's important to know. They're not they may not necessarily need the same kind of support that they would at 8 years old, that they would need when they're teens, that they would need when they're adults. So support does change over time. There are 10 brain domains affected by FASD that can potentially be impacted by alcohol exposure during pregnancy. When we're talking domains, we're really talking about different areas of the brain. It's kind of overwhelming to see all these 10 brain domains, facing us at once, but we want to sort of expose you to that information quickly today, just to touch on it, because this is what FASD diagnostic teams, what they're looking at when they're diagnosing FASD in a kid, in a teen, or an adult. They're testing all these 10 brain domains to see which ones might be significantly impacted. So your child may be affected by differences in some, not all, in some of these brain domains, and this may be affecting your child's daily living. So it's very important to note that not everyone with FASD has the same brain functions affected, right? That's why we call it a spectrum. That's why it's called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, because people sit on, on different places within that spectrum, because not every kiddo or teen with FASD is like another kiddo or teen with FASD. There may be lots of commonality, but because they may not have the same brain functions affected by FASD, so their challenges, their skills may not look the same. Now, when we're diagnosing for FASD, having 3 or more of these brain domains significantly impacted leads to a diagnosis of FASD. So what we've done is we've taken all these 10 brain domains, because it's kind of overwhelming to look at them all at once, and we've organized them in a way that we feel might be meaningful to families. So we've put them under 4 different categories to sort of explain them to you today. So the first category we have is control, the second is thinking, the fourth is daily life, and the fourth is physical. So what we'll do is we'll go through these 4 categories today, and hopefully it'll help explain, and we can touch on a little bit, these 10 brain domains and how they may be affecting your child's life. So the first category is control. So here we're really talking about control over behavior and control over our emotions. So we put the brain domain of attention under this category. So someone with FASD may be easily distracted. They may have difficulty paying attention or sitting still. The next brain domain is affect regulation. So someone with FASD may have difficulty controlling or adjusting their emotions, controlling or adjusting their thoughts. And that could lead to them being depressed, or it could lead to them being very anxious. The third brain domain, and it's a big one under control, is executive functioning. And we use executive functioning skills to sort of navigate through our day-to-day using the resources that are at hand, right? Like using the concept of time, and knowing that concept so that we're able to make appointments on time, right? Or we're able to organize ourselves within the half hour that we've been allotted to organize ourselves. That takes a lot of executive functioning skills. In middle school, when a child has to know what books to bring to a certain classroom, and then the bell rings, they got to bring this book back to their locker and then choose the other book that they'll need for the next class. They all need executive functioning to perform those skills effectively. Someone with FASD may have deficits with executive functioning. So they may have trouble with planning, with sequencing, with problem solving, with organizing. They may seem quite impulsive or hyperactive. So controlling that impulsivity. They may have difficulty understanding cause and effect and abstract concepts. So that may make it difficult for them to control their behavior. We talked a bit about cause and effect before, and how it doesn't happen as naturally for kids with FASD or with individuals with FASD. Another example of cause and effect could be, I speed down a particular road. I get stopped by the police. They give me a speeding ticket. That speeding ticket has now decreased the likelihood that I'll speed down that road again. I've understood the relationship between me speeding and then me getting the traffic ticket. So the cause was me speeding. The speeding ticket was the effect. I've understood quite naturally that relationship. Someone with FASD may not understand that relationship as naturally, as intuitively as we do. They might say they understand it, but they may not intuitively understand. It may not change the way they're going to behave again in the future. So you could see where our kids with FASD, how they run into a lot of trouble, how it always seems like they're not making the right decisions, or they're being impulsive, or they're thinking too much in the moment. They're not thinking about how that's going to affect them in the future. So that leads to also abstract concepts, right? Anything abstract is anything you can't see right in front of you, is anything you can't touch. Time, finances, the future. These are all things we can't touch, we can't see. But if we're really good with abstract concepts, understanding abstract concepts and ideas, we can kind of make ourselves feel sometimes what something will feel like in the future, right? If we have this ability sometimes to know, if I do this, then this will cause this other thing to happen. And this other thing to happen, I know what that feels like. I can make myself feel what that feels like right now. So I'm going to avoid doing this thing that's going to cause this other thing to happen. There's a lot of abstract thinking happening there. Someone with FASD may not be able to have that whole process come to them as naturally, as intuitively as it does for some of us that don't have FASD. So it looks like we're really good at making decisions, but we've got that abstract concept, right? We're able, that abstract thinking, that is adding that extra level of support when we're making decisions. Some with FASD may not have that. So it's important to know that, right? When we look at them, we think, wow, they're, they don't really care how this is going to affect other people. They don't really care how this is going to affect their future, what they're doing right now. Well, they may not understand. They may not understand quite as well as we do, quite as intuitively as we do. Okay, the second category is thinking. Under thinking, we put cognition. Cognition is thinking, reasoning, solving problems. Again, solving complex problems that might need abstract thinking involved. We also have memory, the domain of memory. And that, some with FASD may have difficulty with long-term, short-term, even with working memory, right? Accessing information when you need it in the moment. Also, due to memory impairment, they may appear to lie sometimes. And we'll talk a bit more about that. The brain sometimes fills in holes in our memory with other information automatically without us consciously knowing that this is happening. And when we retell an event with those holes being filled in, it can look like a lie. And that's called confabulation. We'll go over in more detail what that is and what that looks like. I'm sure a lot of you have come across that term before and are quite familiar with it, but we'll go into more detail. Some with memory issues, of course, has trouble with memorizing and may sometimes seem forgetful. Again, accessing, organizing information all takes memory. And then the third domain under thinking is language. So someone with FASD may have a language development delay. They may have difficulty understanding lengthy conversations or instructions. You might have a kid who speaks very well, but doesn't always understand when other people are speaking to them. So they may be able to use all these cool big words, but when another person uses those big words, they may not understand what those words mean. The third category is daily life. And, these domains that we put in here are really domains that seem to overlap with other domains that I've talked about. So things like academic achievement. So a child with FASD may have difficulty in school with things like reading, math, comprehension, again, abstract ideas, abstract concepts. They may have difficulty with adaptive behavior, social skills, and social communication. You know, we could just call this domain social skills, right? Communicating with other people, that's social skills. Knowing personal boundaries, reading social cues, that's social skills, right? So they may have difficulty with some of these things. Also, they may be very immature or not as mature as other kids their own age. So they may be socially vulnerable, right? So they may want to do things that other teenagers are doing, but may not always understand sort of the consequences of some of those things, or may not really understand them in a way that other kids their own age understand. And again, they may have difficulty taking another person's perspective, seeing something from another person's, you know, being in someone else's shoes. And with some of our teens too, we see that they, you know, because of this immaturity maybe sometimes, and because of other issues, they may have trouble taking care of themselves, maybe taking care of their hygiene, or, you know, remembering to shower when you need to shower, brushing teeth, those kinds of things. And they may also have issues with other things that kids their age are able to do, teens their age are able to do, like manage money or like cope in certain stressful situations. And then the last category is physical. We put neuroanatomy and neurophysiology under there. That's really just talking about the brain structure, brain function. Someone with FASD might have a smaller head. They may have a seizure disorder. You'll see when your child or your teen gets assessed for FASD, they always measure the head, right? So that always comes into play. It's a domain that they do test. And then motor skills. So things like gross motor skills, they may have difficulty with, like running, sitting, standing, or fine motor skills. Anything we use our fingers, using scissors, using pencils, maybe even buttoning a shirt. They may have difficulty with those things. Any questions about the 10 brain domains? We just sort of lightly touched on them, just to give you an idea of what we test for, and also what your child may be, it might be affecting your child's life.
So there was some resources that were shared about putting your strengths to work. So that's in the comment section. And Davina had commented that it's quite low functioning in order to receive a severe impairment in the brain domains. So just an observation there that she wanted to share with everyone. And Absolutely. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the resources as well. My favorite part of doing these workshops live, when we do workshops, is the parents teaching one another, is the parents sharing something. I once had a parent come to a workshop and tell me, oh, I know everything you're going to talk about today. I just wanted to know if there was some resources that I don't know about from other parents, right? So that's the real magic of workshops. So thank you for sharing that. So outside of the 10 brain domains, there may also be sensory issues. So we process information through, you know, the big 5 senses like sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. But there's also other senses that we process information through, and that's, you know, balance, movement, and also what our internal organs feel. Your child with with FASD may have sensory issues, so they may have difficulty responding effectively to different types of sensory input, or too much sensory input coming at them at once. So we process this information that's coming from our senses, and we know either to respond to it or to ignore it. Some with FASD may have difficulty ignoring all the sensory input coming at them at once and being able to focus on the sensory input that's probably the most important for them, right? We're able to sort of, sometimes if something important's happening, we're able to tune out the poster on the wall, maybe the air conditioner sound running, and we're able to focus really on what's important, and that could be someone telling you or giving you instructions in front of you. Someone with FASD may have difficulty managing all that, right? So they might not be able to focus just on the one thing that's the most important. They may have difficulty sort of processing all of it coming to them at once. And they might be good at managing sensory input one day and then not so good the next. Children and youth with FASD also can feel very flooded by sensory input. So they might be maybe hypersensitive, or they might be hyposensitive, where they might feel certain sensory input too little, and some may actively seek more of that sensory input. For kiddos, we know that sometimes they're unable to appropriately communicate their sensory difficulty if they have any. And this might look like a bad behavior to us, right? So you may have a kid who all day long can't help but focus on the tag at the back of their shirt and how it's bugging them, how it's itching them. And they might be easily, it might overtake everything, it might exhaust them, and they might be on edge all day, and they might have a temper tantrum, and they weren't able to appropriately communicate that this shirt that they're wearing is quite uncomfortable. So we have to be detectives here as well, right? Especially with our younger kiddos who may not always be able to express these kinds of needs. So we could figure it out sometimes by seeing what they're doing, seeing if this could be a sensory issue. And sometimes we have a guess as to what is really going on. And that's where we could try something, see if that will help as a support. An occupational therapist may also be able to help in this area. Okay, so we're going to do an activity together, and I will give a cue at one point for Mariana, who is our web producer, to put us into smaller virtual rooms, sort of breakout rooms. That won't happen right away, but I'll give that cue in a few minutes. And what will happen is you don't have to do anything with your computer. You don't have to touch anything. Mariana will automatically grab the virtual you and put you in a smaller room with a smaller audience, and we're going to have a discussion in those breakout rooms around this activity that I'm about to introduce. And there'll be a host there who will introduce themselves, and they'll help facilitate the activity. It'll either be myself, Victoria, or Dawn, whom you met earlier during our presentation. Okay, so in our breakout session, what we'll do is we will look at a scenario. I'll introduce the scenario on the next slide before we go in our breakout rooms, but this scenario is of an 8-year-old girl with FASD. And what we're going to do is we're going to be detectives, and we're going to try and figure out where certain of Amy's challenges might be coming from. There'll be a chart in the breakout room of the 10 brain domains, and just very, maybe one sentence explanations of all the brain domains to help you as a guide. So what you could discuss is what brain domain might be contributing to some of these challenges. Often these brain domains are oversimplified in how they're presented, and we know that they overlap a lot when we look at symptoms and functioning. So it might be more than one brain domain that explains or could be a cause of some of Amy's challenges. Also, we know as parents, not every single challenge that our kid has falls under FASD, falls under these 10 brain domains. It could be sensory, right? There could be a sensory sensitivity that might be contributing to some of the challenges, or it could just be certain life events. Kids, teens, they go through certain different life events that could be quite challenging, and it could be quite difficult to cope as we're transitioning to this new stage of life. So consider those three things: brain domains, sensory, life events. What three might be a contributing or influencing factor in some of Amy's challenges? So let me introduce you to Amy, who is 8 years old. When her mom asks her to do something, she says no. When her mom takes her by the hand to follow through on an instruction, such as brush your teeth, Amy screams and runs, cries, and goes to her room and slams the door. At school, she fidgets, she wanders, she doodles, while the other kids are working on their schoolwork. Her drawings can be quite good, and she can tell you big, imaginative stories around these drawings. But both her parents are starting to be concerned because she's also telling these big stories around her day, around events that happened during her day that her parents asked her about. After school, she wants to use the computer to watch YouTube videos of people making crafts and drawings. She can be quite messy when making these crafts. And when her parents say, no, we're not doing that today, she'll scream. She enjoys going outdoors with her family, such as hiking, camping, and other physical activities, but she'll scream and cry if her parents say something encouraging or compliment her older brother. Her parents are exhausted, as Amy has started to hit and yell at her brother whenever he interacts with mom and dad. What we'll talk about next is accommodations and how we can help our kids, our teens. And so we'll talk about different examples for accommodations, for strategies in this section. And what we'll do is we'll use just some of the brain domains from before as launching points. So the first brain domain that we'll look at is language. So someone with FASD may have difficulty with certain aspects of language, like complex, abstract, symbolic language, such as metaphor, sarcasm. Sometimes they may not always understand the words that are being used around them, and they may not always understand what's being asked of them. And sometimes due to attention, so you can see how the brain domains start to overlap here, but sometimes due to attention deficits, that could also be affecting language, right? So they may only sometimes pick up a few words that someone is telling them. There could be some processing to delay happening there. And so in the moment, they're just picking up one or two words of a full sentence, of a full instruction. Or again, that processing delay might be coming into play. They might take a while to process what the words mean. They may also fail to follow through on an instruction that they agreed to do. And it could be they didn't understand the instruction. It could be that they were covering for not being able to pick up all the words like all the other kids around them. Or it could be memory impairment, right? Another brain domain. They may have forgotten the instruction. So how do we help? So we know with our younger kiddos, it really helps, especially if they're having difficulty focusing on certain sensory input or information that's coming at them in the moment. It helps them to give them that extra layer of support, to say their name first, make eye contact, especially in group settings such as a classroom. This helps them to focus on you and to what you're saying. Remember, our kids are not always able to filter through all the stuff, all the information coming through their senses all at once, right? It's all coming at once in an environment. So they may not be able to filter through all those other things and just focus on you. It's also important with your teens, even with older kids, when you're given instructions, when you're giving them information, not to be in the other room, right? Not to yell from another room to pick up the laundry basket. What you're doing there is you're competing with all the other sensory stuff happening in the room that they're in. That is much closer to the child, is much closer to the teen than you who's in the other room. So if you're the kind of kiddo, if you have the kind of kiddo that doesn't do well when you're in the other room delivering instruction, give them that support. Go into the room that they're in, make eye contact, say their name, and then give them the information you need to give them. Say what you mean. Our kids with FASD may have difficulty with abstract concepts, with abstract language. So use concrete language. Use words that they understand, that they use themselves. Leave no guesswork. If you want them to do something, don't pose it as a question. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. State exactly what you mean. This leaves no guesswork, and we're not relying on hints. And state exactly what to do. This is very important for kids with FASD. Avoid focusing on what you don't want. So replace things like don't run with walk, or avoid abstract broad instructions. So instead of saying things like go clean your room, it's best to state exactly what to do, like pick up 3 books and put them on the shelf. I know some of you are already doing these kinds of accommodations, and for some of you, this works quite well. Another thing that we hear parents tell us that works well is show them as you're asking them to do something. So show them, do it alongside them. That your child might be a hands-on learner. And so what we're doing when we're showing them, when we're doing it alongside them, is we're sort of giving them support as they do it, right? Because the more they'll do it, the more they'll learn how to do it, right? That's a hands-on learner. Here, we're playing to the strength of a child who's a hands-on learner. And they may need to be shown what to do as they're being told what to do, like how to line up books on a shelf, instead of them making their own pile on a shelf because no one really showed them what the expectation was. And we've had parents tell us, you might have to clean up the room very calmly with them, alongside them, over many years before they need less and less help and reminders to do so. The same works, the same when we're asking them to do something. The same works when we're asking for information from them, when we're asking questions. Be very specific about what information you need to know from them. So be specific about what information you're seeking. Sometimes it's better, instead of saying something like, how was your day at school? And then they mumble something, it's better to focus on a particular event or item from that day. Like, did you get your math test back today? Break everything down to simple pieces. So we know one-step instructions given one at a time works really well for all kids, right? You give them the one instruction, they complete the instruction before we give them a second instruction, right? So instead of saying, especially for younger kiddos, instead of saying something like, pick up your shoes and put on your coat, instead we'd break that down. We'd say, pick up your shoes, please. The kid picks up their shoe. We give them time to process, they pick up their shoes, or whatever, or they put on your shoes. The kid puts on his shoes. We wait until we say, okay, put on your coat, and then they put on your coat. So what we've done there is we've broken down that instruction into two one-step instructions. Your child may not need that kind of support, but if you find that your child, especially younger kiddos, are not following through instructions when there's different steps in them, it might be good to look at breaking down those into all one-step instructions and delivering them after they finish the last instruction. And visuals help, right? With our kiddos, we know that a lot of them have this strength that they're visual learners. They're very strong visual learners. So you might want to show them how to do something, model how to do something as they're delivering the instruction. And a big aspect under language is to provide information in visual format to accompany words. So many of our kids with FASD have difficulty with language and verbal skills, but have these great visual abilities. So pictures to accompany words as well can have really good effects. So you might have an instruction that you were able to sort of put into visuals. Maybe you create a visual strip with different pictures of what that instruction looks like when someone does it, right, with the different steps. And then you could deliver that instruction while you're showing them the visual, or you're placing the visual where they can easily refer back to it as they're going through that task, as they're going through that instruction. We usually call those visual aids. Sometimes they can line out, or they can sort of show you, display what your day will look like, different events of the day, different subjects of the day. And that's what we call a visual schedule. We'll give you an example later on in the presentation, but you can create those for free using a website called connectability.ca. So it's the word connect and the word ability together, connectability.ca. That is listed along with other visual engines in our resource list, which we'll tell you about at the end of the presentation. We'll give you the link to that. Again, we know kids with FASD, some of the kids with FASD have difficulty processing information as quickly as we do. So give them time to process. They may have difficulty with auditory processing. So what happens with us is we hear, those of us who don't have FASD, we hear an instruction, it goes, or a piece of information verbally, It goes into our ear because we hear it. It travels to an area of the brain that translates the word, the sound that you just heard, and it gives it meaning for you so you understand what the other person said. This happens instantaneously in our brain. It feels like it happens instantaneously in our brain. So we don't know what that delay feels like for someone that has auditory processing delay or has any kind of processing delay, because we tend to process information very quickly, instantaneously. We don't know what it feels like for them. So if you know that your child takes time to either understand something, or you give them something, you give them an instruction and it takes time for them to start doing it, there might be a processing delay occurring. So give your child as much time as they need. They may also need reminders too, right? There's also, if memory is also playing a factor here. But always be aware when we're giving our kid information, if we know that there's a delay, there's a processing delay, that we're not overloading their brain with all this information. We're slowing down the information. We're slowing down our instructions. You can imagine how frustrating it would be that you haven't thought out what someone just told you before they tell you something else. And then they tell you something else. And then they tell you something else. And you're still working on that first thing that they told you about. How would you react to that? Would you have a tantrum? Right? Would your brain feel overloaded? And for someone who feels that this is not happening for anybody else but for me, so I'm not going to tell people, right? I'm covering because I don't want to look like I'm not trying to keep up with everyone else. So it could be very, very frustrating communicating this processing delay to other people. Okay, the next brain domain affected that can be affected in your child is memory. And so some with FASD may have difficulty remembering information, difficulty retrieving information too, that sometimes that feeling, it's on the tip of my tongue, I know, but you're not able to retrieve the information in the moment. That could be happening with someone with FASD a lot. They could also be having difficulty with retention, so remembering things. They could have difficulty making use of information, right? They know the information, but they don't know how to put it to work, how to make use of it, especially in the moment when they need it. And there could also be a lot of inconsistent learning taking place. Inconsistent learning is when you know how to do something one day and then you forget the next. So, Bill knows how to load the dishwasher one day, Bill who's 17, and then the next day when I ask him to clean up the table after dinner, he forgets how do I load the dishwasher? What do I do first? Or you could have, our little Amy, 8 years old, know how to do basic addition one day in math, and then the next day need help with the same problems, with the same math problems. So there's some inconsistent learning that could be occurring. So how do we help with our kiddos who may have difficulty with memory? So this seems obvious, but use reminders and be very generous with reminders. And that's where it's not so obvious. That's where we don't always provide these reminders in a generous, supportive tone. Right? So I know.
That to you?
I'm sorry? Did someone have a question?
I don't think so. I think it was just audio, but I think it's been addressed.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So thank you for that, Victoria. Sometimes we might give reminders in a way that, because we're frustrated, because, as parents, we go through a lot and we're offering a lot of support. We might be tired. And then when we give a reminder, it may not come out so supportive. So we might say things like, I've told you 100 times, I guess I'll tell you 101 times, and then you give the reminder, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving those reminders in a way that they won't feel they can't ask us to clarify, that they can't ask us to repeat, because we want our kids to grow up with the confidence that whenever they don't understand something, whenever they miss something, they have no qualms about asking the person to clarify, about asking the person to repeat themselves. Have you ever been to a meeting and someone asks someone else to repeat what they just said or to clarify what they just said because they didn't really understand, that person asking for that is probably the most confident person in that meeting. They have no qualms looking like they didn't understand while everyone else understood. It's usually a director, right? Or the manager or the boss, because they're that confident. We want our kids to be that confident as they get older. We want them to be able to advocate for themselves. So here, with reminders, we can also ask them, what kind of reminders would help you around certain things you're having difficulty with? Maybe they're having difficulty around their morning routine. So we could ask them, where can I put a reminder, a visual reminder that would help you? So here that P pops up because here we're asking them to participate in an accommodation. We're teaming up with them. And you could use visual reminders like I talked about before. You could create them on connectability.ca. Here are some examples of what a morning routine might look like for a younger kid, or even a youth, a teenager. And you could ask them, where can I put this that would help you? Or this would be, how to get dressed in the morning. You could even have one, how to use a dishwasher, the different steps, and then asking your teen, where would you like me to put this? Would this help if I put it right on the machine? Visual reminders, again, work much better sometimes than words. And also visual reminders are there, they stay there, right? You could walk away, you could have said it and then you're gone. But that visual reminder, instruction is always there. So they always have something they can refer back to. Also ask your child if they need help. Sometimes our kids won't ask for clarification, won't ask for someone to repeat themselves because they don't want to appear stupid. We want them to know that it's okay to ask for help. I went to British Columbia a few years ago. I went to a 4-day or 5-day workshop. It was a big convention. It was huge. We stayed in a great hotel and I got a whole bunch of material. And when I came home, I started going through the material, and this is what stuck with me for the whole thing. It actually brought chills because it was so simple. It was a quote on a little bookmark, and it said, show them that asking for help is okay. We need to show our kids that asking for help is okay. Don't let anybody make you feel stupid, quote unquote stupid, for asking for help. The most confident people rely on other people's help. Everyone relies on other people's help. So we need, here you'll see the A popping up, knowing when to advocate. Here we're teaching them how to become better advocates. And we're also advocating for them with teachers, with coaches, and we're telling them, please offer an environment where my kid could ask for help when he or she needs it. So you might have a teacher who says, I say it once, and then if you didn't hear me, too bad, so sad. Well, that's not going to work for someone with FASD. They need to know that asking for help is okay, because there are a million inappropriate ways to ask for help, right? Having a tantrum, running out of the room, right? What we call, they were screaming for help in those situations. We want to teach them the most appropriate way of asking for help. A lot of our kids are inconsistent learners, so teaching skills can sometimes be very difficult. And we know our kids with FASD are hands-on learners. They do really, a lot of them have this strength where they're really good at learning through doing, right? These hands-on learners. I love hands-on learners. I love working with hands-on learner, and I'm a hands-on learner. I don't understand learning from reading from a book sometimes. I'd rather do it. You're engaging more, your brain's engaged more, and we know a lot of our kids with FASD, this is how they learn best. So repetition when teaching a skill can engage, can sort of activate this hands-on learning happening. So your child likely learns best through repetition. I think we all do. And short-term memory is often impaired with FASD. And we know that repetition strengthens skills in everyone's brain, even if you have issues with memory, even if you have issues with impulsivity. the more you do something, the less taxing it is on your brain. What we're really saying there is we know that with FASD that the front part of the brain, the higher cortical functioning is more effective, right? The basic, the limbic, they're not as effective, these three other areas of the brain. I'm getting a bit inside baseball, but what's happening with repetition is you're using less of the part of your brain that requires complex thinking, that requires, abstract thinking. And these are kind of activated when we're trying to figure something out, right? That complex thinking. But when you do something over and over again, you're not thinking that way. You're using different parts of your brain. And that's why repetition works really, really well. Think of when you first learned to tie your shoes, or later in life when you first drove to a new job in an area that you didn't know anything about. So the first times may have seemed very daunting, right? Driving to a new job. And you may have even been a bit stressed. Oh, I can't find it. I'm going to be late. But through repetition, going to your work, using that route became easier and easier, to a point where sometimes you would show up to work and you forget, oh, I forgot when I drove here today, because it's so automatic. You learn that through repetition. The same with shoe tying. Right now, when you tie your shoes, you're not even thinking anymore. The hands just seem to know what to do. The feet just seem to know what to do. You don't have to think about it anymore. And repetition, when we're teaching with our kids, can be a very positive experience. It doesn't have to be an averse experience, right? Where we're sitting them down, we're making them do it over and over and over again. It's positive when it isn't forced, when it occurs naturally. So when we're teaching a certain task, we're teaching it only when it needs to be done, right? Like if you're teaching tying your shoes, tying your shoes only when the shoes actually need to be tied. And repetition can be very, very positive also when it's structured, when you build it into a routine and it's consistent, right? So if it's built into a routine, you're building into a regular routine, so you know it's happening maybe daily. And when it's supported. So you're helping your child through that skill. Maybe if it's shoe tying, it's hand over hand at first, but then you're doing less and less as a parent over time. And they're doing more and more. Right? So you're sort of fading your support over many, many, many different occurrences. You may already be teaching your other kids this way, but you're probably able to fade your support much quicker with a kid who doesn't have FASD. With a child who might have memory issues, it's best to do that fading where you're doing less and less over time over a longer period of time. And if the task you're teaching is something like shoe tying, then set aside enough time every morning for shoe tying. Set aside enough time for you to be patient, for you to be supportive, and for you to be able to give that support. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about lying, and that's in quotation marks. And I know a lot of you know a lot of this stuff around confabulation and not telling the truth. And we know that lying, the reason why it's in quotation marks is because with FASD, it likely is not really lying. So this falls again under the brain, under the memory domain, because due to problems with memory, your child may be confused about what really happened. And so your child may retell events in an incorrect order, or sometimes this may not even be because of confabulation, which we'll talk about more, but it could just be they didn't remember and they want to cover up for not remembering, and so they might make something up, right? They don't want to, in a lot of these instances, they don't want to disappoint you. They also don't want to disappoint themselves. And so in order to keep up with everyone else around them, they have spent most of their lives, feeling like an imposter probably, because they weren't able to do all these other things that everyone else is doing, even though they're putting in probably way more effort, way more work than everyone else. So sometimes they may feel ashamed for not remembering something, and they may cover up. And then they may confabulate, right? To fill in pieces that they've forgotten or misunderstood. What's happening with confabulation is the brain automatically fills in blanks So those things, those holes in our memory, those things that we don't remember quite well, your brain automatically fills those holes with things that you may have heard, things you may have imagined, things you may have heard someone else sounds in a conversation, something that happened that wasn't really part of that memory, but it happened to you anyways, maybe later on. All those things get filled up, those holes, so that your brain can make sense of the event, so that you're able to retell the event, right? It happens to us too, right? So we might remember a birthday party from when we were 10 years old, and for years, we've been telling the story that mom gave us a blue cake on my 10th birthday party, and Uncle Bill was there, and I got a bike that year. And then someone provides you with a VHS cassette of your birthday, depending on how old you are, and you watch that VHS cassette, and the cake's chocolate, right? It's your 10th birthday party. You've never seen this video before. Someone was there that took the video. The cake's chocolate, you didn't get a bike, and Uncle Bill is nowhere to be seen in the video. So what may have happened is confabulation. Over the years, you may have filled in those blanks from your 10th birthday party from other birthday parties that you've had, from other birthday parties that you've heard about. That blue cake may have been from a really cool movie you saw when you were a kid. And your brain has filled in all these things into that memory. And now when you retell it, it comes out as a lie. It's not true. There's certain bits that aren't true. And the more you tell a certain version of events, the realer it becomes to you. The more your brain will commit to it. It's like a skill. The more I tie my shoes, the more my brain, there's neural pathways that build in your brain, the more those neural pathways build in my brain, and the stronger that shoe tying skill becomes solid, becomes strong. The more I retell you a certain version of events, the more that certain version of events in my brain becomes strong. So you could see how this happens to us occasionally. You could see how someone with memory issues, how this can happen quite often. Confabulation. So you might have a little girl or a little boy, and you tell them to go brush their teeth at night, and they tell you they did it. You go check the toothbrush, it's dry. You call them into the bathroom, show them the dry toothbrush, and you say, you didn't brush your teeth. And they are quite adamant. They say, no, I brushed my teeth. What they may be remembering is brushing their teeth this morning or brushing their teeth yesterday. But the more they tell you that they brushed their teeth, the more they believe it, the more their brain has committed to it, and the more frustrated they'll become, the more they'll stomp their feet, the more they'll cry, the more they'll say or scream, nobody believes me around here. Everybody thinks I'm always lying. I get blamed for everything. Because we've now made them confabulate over and over again, right? And so now their brain is really committed to this certain version of events. So as much as possible, reduce opportunities to confabulate. Sometimes instead of asking if they did something, ask them to show you, right? So show me what you picked up in your room. And just ask what you really need to know. So avoid unnecessary questions, right? These are strategies I would use if confabulation is an issue. If not always telling the truth is an issue with your child. And remember that processing delay. When you're asking questions, give them time to process, right? Don't expect them to give you an answer right away. Give them time to process the question, and they might be able to tell you a better version of what actually happened, right? If their brain has time to think about it and then turn into words and then tell you. There's some great strategies out there for kids that are known to confabulate. There's one where if you want to start talking about an event that they just went to that was exciting, maybe have them take pictures during the event, and then on the device when they come home, they could show you the pictures and then describe what happened in the pictures. So things like that, right? Those all reduce opportunities for the child to confabulate. And we know that sometimes kids will give you a response to a question that you asked a while back. You might be on your third question and they're still thinking about the first question. And then they give you the answer to the first question, but they gave it to you after you asked the third or fourth question. So it could be frustrating for both of you. You could see how teens, if they're in trouble with the law or they're being interviewed by an authority figure like a police officer, how that could become quite problematic. Stay connected with your child. Do not punish for confabulation, for storytelling. Your child may have short-term memory problems. They may have challenges controlling impulsivity, right? So a kid having trouble controlling what they do in the moment will tell you a version of events sometimes so as not to disappoint you, because over and over and over again, their impulsivity has disappointed you. And they've had enough. So sometimes they will tell you something that's not truthful to cover for them not being able to control their impulsivity. They may also, like us, see things differently under stress, and so when they retell you an event, it could seem like they're storytelling. And also, if we're asking them what someone else said to them, what they tell us could be like broken telephone, right? They may not have caught every word that someone else said to them. Marianne Bukowski is a parent, I think from the Halton region, who helped us with our presentation today. She was great. Her and another parent, Darlene Duran, were both very helpful in getting the presentation to you folks. And I want to read one of her quotes around confabulation. She said, quote unquote, "It is important to always stay connected with your child. If your child tells you something that is not true, let it go. If there is a concern around safety, follow up with others that were present. Give your child time. In a day or two, they may provide more information that helps you understand what may have actually happened. By letting your child talk to you without you reacting, you let them know they are safe and can come to you. For the safety of our children, we want them to know that it is safe to share with us and to ask for help or for us to just listen. I have found that my son will share things and it helps him to process things, and he often comes to very smart conclusions on his own." Remember, consequences don't work with these kiddos. Well, with some of these kiddos, we know that consequence-based strategies don't work. So punishing for lying, punishing for confabulation will only frustrate your child. They probably won't know what they're being punished for. Instead, focus on supporting their challenges with attention, their challenges with memory, supporting their language challenges, or their inability to always control their impulses. We're going to take a short break, but before we do that, is there any questions? We're covering a lot of info today.
There's no questions in the chat box. There's an observation from Mike to recognize that confabulation is therapeutic value, meaning that it's not necessarily a bad thing for them. It serves a purpose. So it allows conversation. Mike, did you want to expand on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times, the brain is trying to make sense of a past event. And I think Marianne, the parent, she was really great. Like what she's saying is give the child time. Their child is still processing the past event, right? In the moment, there might be some holes in there.
They can hear
And
you.
in order to make sense of an event sometimes, just for the sole purpose of being able to retell it to someone else, confabulation might occur, right? So giving them time to process what happened, giving them time to figure out a few things that they weren't able to figure out in the moment can be very, very helpful. Someone like Amy, who's always drawing, who's telling you these great stories around the drawings, maybe using that, right? Using that to tell you about some past event, to tell you about her day. We're not always going to get the entire truth from people if we're looking for those hard facts all day long from our kid who's not able to provide them because of those memory issues. When your child is communicating with you, to take what they're communicating to you at face value. And someone who's dealing with death is probably the most abstract thing in the world. The person was there one day, the person's no longer there today. To process that as a kid, I don't know if you can fully process that as a kid. And so revisiting over and over again with the folks that she trusts this happening, you know, can be quite meaningful. And it's great that you guys are there for her to help support that. And what you're doing is you're there as a support to help her process that this person was once here and is no longer here. That this whole idea that there could be, you know, this whole idea that we could be here one day and not here the next, right? So abstract and very complex for a child. Okay, so the next brain domain that we'll talk about is social skills. And with FASD, we know that some of our teens, especially some of our kids, act younger than kids their own age, and they do things that are inappropriate, like trying to inappropriately get someone else's attention, maybe trying to make friends with someone else, and they might be invading their boundaries or their personal space when they talk to them. They may also be teased or even rejected, and sometimes they might be bullied, or they're told by peers to do things that they're not allowed to do. So they can be quite vulnerable because of this dysmaturity, and also they can be vulnerable to predators that are posing as friends. So how can we help our kids, our teens? So one thing that that could be quite helpful is to start practicing scenarios with your child, sort of play acting scenarios with your child. So for some of us, that's, you know, out of our comfort zone, but it could be very helpful for our kiddos, especially those who are hands-on learners, those who need to know what it looks like in order for them to understand, right? So here, that blue piece popping up because of our goal of participation. Here we're going to, as much as possible, involve our child, our youth, in some of these strategies. One thing is managing bullies. It could be quite effective, especially with our younger kids, to practice what that looks like, play act what that looks like. What does it look like when I say something really mean to you to get you going, and then you walk away without keeping it going, without getting involved? What does that look like to walk away from a bully? What does it look like? What kinds of things do I say to an adult when I want to tell them that, hey, I'm being bullied every day in the schoolyard? What kinds of things can I tell an adult? Who do I tell? What does it look like to play in the schoolyard near supervisors, where we all know bullies are not likely to bully you, right? In that area. What does that look like to play near a supervisor? Is it just okay that I see the supervisor from the corner of my eye across the schoolyard? Or am I actually playing within that vicinity? Like, how far away? Practice what that looks like with your kiddo. Practice things like handling rejection. We never really teach that to kids, but it's very important in social skills. What does it look like when I go up to a circle of kids and I say, hey, can I play? And one kid says, no, you can't join our group, we've got enough players. What does it look like when I, say, okay, and I move on to another group and ask if I could play, right? That appropriate interaction. But what does it look like if I, in that instant where the kid says, no, you can't play, we have enough people in our group, and then I blow up? What does that look like to everyone else in the schoolyard, who then thinks, whoa, this kid's a bit difficult, maybe I don't want to play with him when he comes around and asks me to play? So practicing what that all that looks like. To just tell a kid these things, for someone with FASD, even most kids, it's not very meaningful. It's much more meaningful if you play act it, if you show the kinds of things that you could do appropriately. Show what it looks like to handle when you're frustrated with other kids, with other peers. Personal boundaries, right? Practice. Like, you could tell your kid, well, you're supposed to stand an arm's length away from another kid when you're talking to them, to give them that personal space. But what does that look like? Show them, talk to them while giving them personal boundaries. Measure out, with your arm, how far away they are from you. It's good for them to experience these scenarios so that they know what you're talking about when we're talking about these things. Practice turn taking, expose them to opportunities in your home where there's a lot of sharing involved, so that when they go into the classroom, they don't think it's weird that someone else is using the marker that they use, right? I know when COVID, they're probably not doing that right now, but post-COVID, hopefully we'll go back to sharing our materials and things like that. But in your home, you could do things like drawing on the same piece of paper, a huge piece of paper on the table. It's kind of like a mural. Everyone has to share real estate or a space on that piece of paper, drawing something. Maybe it's for a big event like a birthday party, or grandma's coming over and you want to make a big sign. Practice sharing the space. Practice sharing from the same jar of markers. Play games with your kids, especially if turn taking is an issue or you feel will become an issue. Play games where everyone gets a turn, so that your kid knows what it feels like to not have a turn, to have someone else have a turn, but know through repetition that it always comes back to me. Even though it's not my turn now, it will be my turn after. I will get a chance to play again. Letting them know what that feels like. That when it's not your turn, the world didn't end. They need to know that it comes around, that the turn comes back. They need to know what that feels like. They need to be exposed to that. And here we're really taking advantage of if they're a strong visual learner. We're showing them what things look like. If they're a hands-on learner, we're showing them what things feel like when you go through them. Provide social opportunities. More and more, we're not playing on the street, like we used to in the 60s, 70s, 80s. We used to be out there on the street playing with some kids that we barely even knew, right? They were pretty much complete strangers from another street over. But we had all these great opportunities where we were socially involved, where we were maintaining a set of rules within games, right? We were sort of managing ourselves, refereeing ourselves. That's not happening so much anymore. More and more things are through play dates. Things are more organized. So we need to make sure that our kids are still being provided with opportunities where they can interact with other kids. During COVID, it might be more difficult, but post-COVID, this would be something that I would, seek out. Maybe there's social skills groups. At the beginning, it could be virtually, right? I know some of them are provided through the internet. Post-COVID, seeking those out in person. Those groups where maybe kids are meeting on a regular basis and they're talking about, as they get older, they're talking about certain things like social skills. There could also be recreational groups or clubs in your community, maybe through Parks and Rec. Maybe they meet once every Saturday afternoon, and there is an opportunity for extra supervision if your child needs that. There's an opportunity for guidance, for built-in accommodations. These situations is where I would advocate for my child, right? I would advocate to have those extra supports in place. Marianne Bukowski, one of the parents who helped us today, she's had a great quote. She said, quote unquote, "Start teaching social skills very young. We did this by having playdates at our home every Saturday. We kept them short, maximum 2 hours. We had a young babysitter there to help supervise. We also hosted birthday parties at our home from a very young age. This allowed us to get to know the other children and their parents. We were able to educate parents about our children's FASD and had their contact information if we needed it. Our children made connections with friends, learned sharing, taking turns, etc. Both our boys are older now, but still do great socially to this day. We still have everyone at our home and supervise from a short distance without them feeling smothered." So that's if you have younger kiddos too, you can get started, right, on providing something like that. If you have older kids, this may no longer be an opportunity that you have, but maybe having them invite one person over or two people over and being there as they're interacting and helping them maybe choose some activities that they can do together before those other kids arrive for their hangout or their activity together, their time together. More and more our kids are interacting socially over the internet, and it could be quite problematic for someone with FASD, someone who could easily be taken advantage of. So be present when your child is using the internet. If possible, as early as possible, as young as possible, no internet in their room behind a closed door. Set up internet use in an open public space in your home. and let them know about unsafe people. Let them know about people who call themselves friends on the internet and how they don't always tell the truth. Let them know about predators. Here we're involving them in the strategy, in the accommodation. And you yourself, pay close attention. Watch out for signs that your child may be bullied online, right, from so-called friends. It could be quite hard to do the internet that way with you always present, but it's important. It may take up a large part of your day. It may take up a lot of energy on your part, but it's very important because this is where we're seeing a lot of our teens, a lot of our youth start to get in trouble, right? Start to be taken advantage of. Talk to your child's teachers. Talk to school staff. Find a way that works for both you and the teacher, maybe through a communication book, emails. This is where you're advocating, right? And what goes on in the classroom away from your eyes might show you a different side of your child or your youth that you didn't know about. It could reveal other strengths you didn't know about, but it could also reveal some struggles that you weren't thinking about, struggles that they're having when they're interacting with kids their own age. Maybe with the teacher, suggest that a child be paired with an older mentor or a peer who's more mature in the classroom for modeling purposes, right? When we're talking about modeling, we're meaning to show them, right? To show them how to do this thing, or to show what something looks like when you're doing it appropriately. So they're sort of modeling interaction. They're modeling different ways of doing things. And as well, when you're talking to the teacher, there might be things that are working at home that you could let the teacher know about, right? That might improve, your child's interactions with other kids in their environment, right? In the teacher's environment. And bring your FASD worker, bring another support person with you to school staff meetings or meetings with school staff. They help with expertise, they can help with strategies, with things that you forgot about or didn't think about in the moment, and they're there for personal support. Right? They could even help you take notes. And maintain this communication often and on a regular basis. Also talk to your child, right? If they're having issues with social interactions. Develop a safety plan with your child. Here we're involving them in the strategy. Develop maybe a plan if they need one for when they're feeling overwhelmed by peers. Sound, light, movement, environment, sort of like a plan B, what to do when they're feeling overwhelmed in a social situation. So it could be they're invited to a birthday party, they feel overwhelmed, and we plan it out that they can go to another room in that house where they can have alone time or where they can have an activity on their own. So practicing that with your plan, with your child, keeping the plan simple. We know that sensory issues can have a huge impact on social skills, and a social environment can be a very busy one, and an overloaded brain does not respond in an ideal fashion. So if your child feels overwhelmed in some of these situations, having that plan ahead of time and practicing the plan. Also letting the adult know who might be supervising that event of the plan, making sure they're on board with that plan if you're not going to be there to help facilitate the plan. Okay, and make it fun to practice. Just like the other social skills scenarios, you might have to practice this and what it looks like and how, sort of walk through it with your child. And this could be a plan that's ongoing. You could use the same plan for different social situations that you find yourself in. You could use this plan for the upcoming family reunion. And when people sort of start getting out of hand, they start getting loud or what have you, lots of clang of dishes and all these things. If your child starts, and lots of smells in the room, if your child starts to feel overwhelmed, this could be another way, another environment where they could use that same plan, where they go into another room or they go use a blanket they have to wrap themselves around, and they could do that in the privacy of another space. Whatever you and your child come up with, but it's very important for your child to have lots of input in this plan. Think about how old your child acts around kids their own age. And consider this their developmental age rather than their real age when you're organizing, when you're planning activities like birthday parties, like play dates, like these huge family functions. I know during family functions, I'm stressed out, so you could just imagine how a younger kiddo can feel, right? We need to keep that in mind. And play dates with just one other child is often better. And supervise social activities as much as possible. We want to make sure we're keeping everyone safe. And an adult can also provide structured activities during the play date, or if it's a teen hangout, maybe helping the teen provide a structured activity once their friend comes over. Sex education is essential for all our youth, and so we want to make sure that we're also providing sex education to our kiddos and our youth with FASD. We want to make sure that we're teaching them, we're informing them, that we're setting up an environment where we can have as many conversations as needed. We need to start feeling very comfortable talking sexuality with our kids. And we want to let them know that they can ask you anything at any time. We want to teach things, especially our younger kiddos, like, what can I do in public? What should I be doing in private, right? That public versus private. And also talking about informed consent regarding sexual behaviors. And also how to address sexual desires in a socially appropriate way. Providing things like information about online sexual behaviors like pornography, the distribution and creation of sexual materials, what can happen if I share a nude picture of myself to a friend using texting, using my phone, using the internet. What can happen to that picture? Some sexualized looking behaviors, especially in our younger kiddos, such as self-stimulation or masturbation, may actually be soothing or sensory in nature, especially when they're anxious. So be prepared to talk about appropriate ways to meet these needs. Avoid shaming. Find a safe, appropriate space that they can build into a habit or a routine when they engage in this behavior. And it can take time for them to go to those private spaces, such as their bedroom, on their own. So give it time, but make sure you're very consistent and you're always providing support. You're facilitating them moving from that public space to the private space where they can engage in that self-soothing activity. There's some great websites out there. There's teachingsexualhealth.ca. That's more for caregivers and parents. I love their tagline, be proactive, be prepared. And then for our kids, there's amaze.org. For younger kids, on the same website, there's Amaze Junior. And their tagline is just as great. It's more info, less weird. Okay, the last brain domain that we'll talk about today is affect regulation. Affect regulation is a skill of managing and controlling your emotion, thoughts, and behaviors in a way that best helps you navigate the world around you. A lot of times when we talk about regulation, we're talking about emotional regulation. And emotional regulation refers to how efficiently and effectively a person deals with a stressor and then recovers. We all get caught up in a wave of emotions and thoughts that lead to behaviors that don't help us. It happens to all of us. And all of us naturally produce bursts of energy to better respond to danger or what we perceive as danger, what we think is danger. So it's what's called the fight, flight, freeze response. A lot of us know of this concept. I'll unpack that a bit more. So fight, flight, freeze is your body's natural reaction to danger, and it helps you react to what you think is a threat, right? A perceived threat. So on the news, you'll often hear people say things like, he came at me and I don't know, I just pushed him to the ground. That's fight. Or I didn't have to think, I just jumped out of the way. That's flight. Or I froze and then I knew exactly what to do. That's freeze. It's automatic for all of us. You cannot control fight, flight, freeze. It's like a reflex. It's just that some of us over time have become better at judging what really is danger and what is not. Someone with FASD may misconstrue events as serious threats. So they may perceive things as threats, things that we don't think are threats. And then fight, flight, freeze gets activated. So when your child is upset, fight, flight, freeze is likely occurring. Your child is not being oppositional, they're not disrespecting you. They may feel under attack. They may feel that their safety is threatened, and using everything in their arsenal, like pushing, hitting, swearing, without being able to temper, to control their reaction appropriately. So to us, they look out of control. And with FASD, fight, flight, freeze may be more intense. And what they need is they need our help to feel safe again, right? Because they're feeling threatened. And threats of punishment will just increase this level of threat, will just increase this level of fight, flight, freeze in your child, in your teen. What happens too with fight, flight, freeze is it feels like your brain is short-circuiting, right? Your decision-making can become worse. And it's very difficult to process information, to process new information. It's kind of like when we ask our computer to do all these different things at once. We're pressing all these buttons on the computer, and the computer has had it, it freezes, right? All its resources have been used up. And we know with FASD that fight, flight, freeze is much harder to manage.
But you were doing it too.
So some with FASD may view events as serious threats to their safety, such as someone else getting a compliment. And this physiological reflex may be much more intense with FASD. Some with FASD may have more reactivity to start with. So what do we mean when we say they have more reactivity to start with? So remember, emotional regulation refers to how efficiently and effectively a person deals with a stressor and then recovers. Here, blue represents the level of innate physiological arousal and reactivity. Yellow is stress in everyday life. So that first cup, the person A, has a typical level of physiological arousal and reactivity. A stressor, yellow, is added to their life, but they can manage it. The cup doesn't overflow. Person B has FASD, and their level of physiological arousal may be higher at baseline, so maybe higher from the start. So they have more blue before we add stress. When you add the same amount of stress, the yellow, they may overflow and lose control, right? Because their level of reactivity is much higher. There's a lot more going on in the brain of someone with FASD than with someone without FASD. Your child is likely working way more harder than everyone else in the classroom. They may not be getting the grades that the kid next to them is getting, but they are working much harder. There's a lot more going on in their brain. They have much more reactivity. So the issue is that the person with FASD may have more reactivity to start with than others, and therefore may react more to stressors. I'm going a little quick here, and I apologize. We're just trying to make up a bit of time. We just want to make sure that all of you are able to leave for 12:30, because I know we all lead busy lives, and some of us are working from home, and our kids are home as well. With that in mind, I'll keep going, but your child and FASD, it's important to note that with the diagnosis, that fight, flight, freeze can occur when they're having their meltdowns. And it's not that your child is getting upset on purpose. They're not. What we should be doing is we should be accepting our child's emotions. Everyone has a right to be upset. And being mad at your child or your teen for having the gall, for daring to be upset, will send them deeper into fight, flight, freeze. It's better to accept their emotions. All emotions are valid. Remain calm and talk about what happened later. Right? Here we're involving them in the accommodation. So what do we do when they're upset? Well, they're not feeling safe. So asking things like, well, why are you upset? The answer will probably be, I don't know. And that answer is probably true. And just because your child could get under control yesterday doesn't mean that they'll be able to get under control yesterday. When they're upset, it's the most important thing to do is to show them that they are safe. Act like they are safe. Tell them that they are safe. Their brain is not able to find safety right now. And if we tell them that they're being manipulative in that state, they won't trust us when we tell them that they're safe. When we try and show them that they're safe. Keep talking to a minimum. We know the brain right now is over behaving, it's overactive, and talking is just more information, more noise for the brain to process, to work on. Use a calm and neutral tone. So children often rely on us to know how to feel in certain situations, right? If they're watching, sometimes you might watch a funny movie with them, and they'll look back at you to see if you're laughing at the same joke that they're laughing at, right? They're kind of just checking in. Kids do that a lot with the authority figure in an environment. They always want to know how to feel in certain environments, and a really good way to know is by checking in with the most senior person, with the authority. So it's best if your kid is upset, that you remain calm. You're co-regulating there. You're adding that extra level of support, showing them that you feel the environment that we now find ourselves in, the situation that we now find ourselves in, I think is safe. So that's why I'm calm, right? That's why I'm being calm. So when you're not yelling at the same time as they're yelling, but you're remaining calm, that's the way of showing them that you feel this situation is safe. They are secure in the situation. It's just an extra layer of support that you're providing. It's co-regulating, right? What you're doing is you're mirroring the emotion you want to receive back. You're remaining calm. By yelling, you would just be sort of letting them know that you also don't think we're safe right now. And that'll make them feel even more threatened. So it's best to remain calm. No threats, right? They already feel threatened. Remember, threats will send them more into fight, flight, freeze. And things will worsen. Their brain right now is overacting, it's overactive, so they'll likely misunderstand your threat. They might think it's much worse than it really is, or they'll understand nothing. And also, when your child is in this state, teaching is close to futile. Avoid lecturing. It's not the time. So, as much as possible, develop a plan with other co-caregivers, other people that help take care of your child. Maybe your sister looks after your kids on the weekends, or your brother looks after your son, some afternoons. Let them all know and develop a plan of what to do when the child is upset. Right here, we're advocating. Identify triggers, maybe as a group, and causes to avoid some of the situations that are occurring. And also identify some of those triggers and those causes to behavior so that you know when they happen how best to react. We want to change the way we react. Remember, we don't want to be screaming and yelling ourselves. We want to make them feel safe. So being prepared will give you confidence and calm during meltdowns. It's easier to remain calm in situations where you feel confident about what you're doing. And keep this plan updated with the latest information, the latest developments with all the co-caregivers that you're sharing this plan with. You want everyone to be on board with the plan, delivering the plan the same way. And if you can, involve your child in this plan, right? Come up with a plan with your child, or involve them in this plan that you're developing with and that you're maintaining with co-caregivers. So during calm times, talk to them. Maybe the plan is when you feel this way that you go to a room that's more quiet, or you do an activity that you know in the past has helped you calm down. And then practice cues, right? When you see that your kid's about to be upset, it'd be great if you guys had a cue where you could give them a visual cue to start the plan. The child will start the plan on their own, or you'll help facilitate it. But giving them the cue, maybe it's a hand gesture, is much more effective than giving words, especially when the brain is overactive like that. When you're upset, a visual cue might be a lot more clear in meaning. The visual cue could also be a picture of different activities that they can do, right, when they're feeling upset. Maybe it's wrapping a tight blanket around themselves or wearing noise-canceling headphones. And that could be the cue. Your kid's about to be upset, and then you just pull up this picture, and they can choose maybe what they can do to calm themselves down. And you either facilitate that activity for them, or maybe you've worked it out in the plan that they will facilitate it on their own. They'll do it on their own. And as much as possible, when they're upset, there's not a lot of talking, right? You can talk after. Another feeling that we have to watch out for is being excited, especially our little kiddos. Sometimes they're really excited for something coming up. And again, the body gives you a burst of energy when you're excited. It takes over your whole body, your brain. But for little kids and some of our youth, that feeling of excitement also looks and feels like anxiety. And it puts them on edge, right? And they're more likely in those instances to become upset very easily. So if your kid's this kind of kid that can get upset when they're excited, not just upset, then it might be good to start thinking about when you're planning these exciting activities for yourself to remain calm, right? So if they're jumping up and down because they're excited that you're going to go to the amusement park in 10 minutes, you don't jump up and down with them, right? To get them even more wound up and leading them more to be on the edge and then more easily in a state where they can become upset. What do we do when they're on the verge? So we reduce expectations, right? So you'll start to recognize the signs, or probably already know the signs of when your child is about to become upset. So if possible, reduce expectations when you see those signs. Give them an easier step. Make things easier for them. It might feel like we're giving in during those instances, but what we're doing is we're meeting them where they are at right now, right? What Dr. Ross Green said earlier, that we're meeting them where they're in certain situations, they're giving you the best that they can in that situation with the skills that they have. So we're going to meet them at that point, right? We're meeting them where they are at right now. And we're also building in self-regulation by exposing them to multiple experiences where situations de-escalated before things got worse. So someone who's never experienced de-escalation, so that de-escalation is calming down before things get worse, doesn't know what it feels like, therefore doesn't really know what it is. But if we practice, if we have them experience different occasions, multiple occasions where things de-escalated, that'll become part of their repertoire. They'll start to know, oh yeah, that's what that means. And if they look like they have had it, or they act like they're running on empty in certain situations, then plans may need to change. For example, don't go to that last store you were planning to go to. When they're on the verge, it's really important not to give their brain work to do. You really want to redirect. And redirecting can be something like putting your plan in motion, right? Giving them that visual cue where they can go and to a more calming activity. They can they can remove themselves from what's causing them stress in that environment. Maybe it's going to another room, maybe another easier activity. Maybe it's that little picture with the little activities that they can do that we know calm them, that they know calms them, right? That they've worked out with you. Any questions? I'll just take one question here because we are running a little bit low on time.
There are no questions. There was just a conversation about the FASD roster and whether that will be given to the families after the fact.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about that at the end. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the last slide on affect regulation is just testing behavior. So Nathan Orey has said that, and it's a great quote, that testing is often certainty-seeking behavior, especially with new teachers, with new caregivers. We see a lot of testing behavior sometimes, and it's very important to know that your child's not seeing what they can get away with, but they're actually testing for safety, for consistency. And oftentimes when we see testing behavior, our reaction might be to take away fun, scheduled activities. So a teacher might take away recess to try and punish and control the behavior, right? Because they might feel that the child's just seeing what they can get away with. But if the child is testing for safety, for consistency, which is what is likely happening, taking away a fun schedule activity like recess, or maybe you have a visual schedule and there's some fun stuff during the day, and you threaten to take one of those fun things away to control behavior, what you're doing there is you're actually taking away consistency. You're actually taking away safety if it was scheduled. You want to make sure that no matter what your child does, it has no effect on a scheduled event. When you do that, you're showing that consistency and certainty in your environment are not flimsy. And being consistent will decrease anxiety, even if there's initial testing behavior. Your child is more likely to enter environments where there's a consistent schedule, where expectations are very clear, very consistent, and the expectations are made apparent to them over time, over natural repetition. Okay, we have a short section on interdependence. I really want to get through it. I know we're running a bit low on time, but I think it's just as important as anything else we talked about today. So we all rely on each other, all of us. And we know that as our child with FASD gets older, they may need support in other areas like money management, maintaining their jobs or responsibilities, housing, and life transitions in general. So what we want to propose to you is to think about starting a circle of support for your child, for your teen. And you also, a circle of support, what that is, it's a group to support the youth or child during decisions about their life. So members should know your child or youth, of course, and care about them. And we want this in place early to provide the caregiver with support, and also in case something happens to caregivers. Family, friends, and professionals can be invited to this group. It's also important to involve people who can help make things happen. Some members may change. Some members may have to leave after a while because they're moving away, or so sometimes, you know, the numbers might dwindle, but it's important to keep replacing those people. It's important to keep adding people, especially for upcoming changes, for upcoming issues. Keep this circle of support alive. Maintain it. Your youth should also be able to meet with their circle as friends who can help them sort things that are worrying them, right? Here we're involving them in the strategy, involving them in the accommodation. And it should be a positive experience. This is not an interrogation. This is not that TV show intervention where we're telling the person everything they did wrong. It's not that. What it is, it's a place where the kid, where the teenager will be encouraged, will be motivated. We want them to be motivated to keep coming. So we're focusing on their strengths. We're focusing on their interests. We're building self-image. Their confidence level will be reflected in their effort level, right? So we really want them to be confident. We're building confidence, and we're also addressing any questions, any issues that they might be going through, and we're working together to provide some kind of support to see them through. Okay, we are running a little bit low on time. So Mariana, I don't know if that we need to go into breakout rooms for this one, if that's okay.
That's
Maybe we
okay,
can all,
yes.
yeah, we'll all do it as a big group very quickly. We'll think back to Amy's scenario. I'll put up the slide in a minute. And what I want you to do when we're looking at the slide of Amy's challenges and her family's challenges, think of what are things there that we could add to a strengths inventory. There are things that are happening that could be interests, that could be strengths. Which of these strengths should we be thinking about developing, facilitating, encouraging? And which of these strengths might we be able to start using in some accommodations for her, and some strategies to help her, to support her? And also, are there accommodations that you heard about today, or that you've tried yourself at home and have worked wonderfully, that might help with some of Amy's family's challenges? Okay, so let's look at some of what's happening with Amy. Remember, Amy is 8, and she says no when she's asked to do something. She screams if she's being led by the hand, especially when her mom tries to make her brush her teeth. At school, she fidgets and sometimes walks around. Maybe she might doodle while the other kids are working. Her drawings are very good. She enjoys watching YouTube craft videos. She does make nice crafts, but does make a mess. And her parents are concerned about some of the storytelling that she's been telling them about her day. And she does love hiking. She does love outdoor activities. But when she spends time with her family, she does get very aggressive toward her brother, especially when her parents compliment him, or if he tries to interact with the parents. So seeing that, does anyone have any ideas about strengths that we might help develop in Amy, or strengths that might help with some of Amy's challenges? We do have a resource list that is available as part of this workshop. It's around 44 pages. It's got lots of information in it. You can find out how to best locate the FASD worker in your area, as well as finding support groups and family or FASD groups for families and caregivers. If you'd like, maybe screenshot this or maybe take a picture with your phone for that link. I will be providing my email address shortly, and you can also email me to get that link for our resource list. It's a downloadable resource. We also have an e-learning module that was created alongside this workshop today to complement the information found in the workshop. The link will be provided to your FASD workers in April of 2021. It hasn't been uploaded yet. Again, you can also email me for the link to this e-learning module. It is for caregivers. It's a 20-minute e-learning module that looks at day-to-day challenges and triumphs faced by caregivers caring for children and provides strategies and resources to help families on their journey. And again, if you haven't done so already, connect with the FASD worker in your area. The contact information can be found by using the FASD Ontario portal. It's part of Health Nexus. You can go to it straight by using this link. The link is also found in the resource list that we just told you about. Remember, in order for you to get this service, your child or youth only needs to be suspected of FASD. They don't need the official diagnosis. And there are also FASD family and caregiver support groups across Ontario, and you can find the closest one to you by using the FASD Ontario portal provided by Health Nexus Canada. You can also go to it straight by using this link, and it's also found in the resource list. We also want to acknowledge that FASD is not an Indigenous issue. It affects all walks of life, all cultures, all communities. We also want to highlight a resource today that some of our contributors put together, and that is the guide Parenting Indigenous Children with FASD, a guide to culture for non-Indigenous caregivers. Our contributors really wanted you to know that it's the right of all children to feel connected to their culture. And ideas to respectfully connect the child to their culture can be found in the guide. Again, it's called Parenting Indigenous Children with FASD, a guide to culture for non-Indigenous caregivers. And this resource can be found in the resource list. It's also available, again, at the healthnexus.ca website. So thank you, everyone. Marianne Bukowski, our parent contributor, said that we know that parenting children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder can be rewarding, and our loved ones can live successful, productive lives with support. We produced today's workshop. We created today's workshop along with 28 other agencies. Our partners were all part of a consortium, and we make up the Coordinated Service Planning Provincial Network. And these are our 28 partners. We serve 34 different areas in Ontario. We also want to thank all the individual people who helped contribute to the development of the material for this session. These are all the folks that help with the material as well. I want to thank Victoria and Dawn for helping today. They're FASD workers in your area, FASD coordinators. We also have Mariana, who helps us web produce these things. And also, I really want to thank Ayana Dimitris. She is sort of the silent person behind all this, but she's our project coordinator, and she made everything happen for today. She does all the heavy lifting, and the rest of us just do all the talking. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, the Ontario Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, whose funding made this workshop possible today.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. So this wraps up our session for this morning, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time and joining us. And I also would like to particularly thank Eric for all of the information he provided and talking he had to do. And I also wanted to thank Victoria, who's also behind the scenes. And I was going to mention Ayanna and Mariana as well. Your feedback's really important to us, and we'd like to hear from you about your experience with today's session. So we will be sending out an email with a survey in it, the email that you used to register. And we would ask that if you could please do fill out that survey and send it back to us, because it's really important to hear from you, our caregivers and community partners that are with us today. So thank you again for joining us on behalf of the Coordinated Service Planning Provincial Network. We wish everyone to have a wonderful rest of this beautiful sunny day. Thank you so much, everyone.